to one of you.
I'm starting, aren't I?
Brilliant.
To be safer. Let's see how easily does this clip. Don't say anything bad here.
Lecturing here. You went to Jen's toilets on the breaks.
Oh no.
I think that happened in right, fantastic. So, I think, we'll start.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, folks, so I'd like to introduce to you Katie Howe and Will Dean from Barker Brattle Intellectual Property. So they're going to talk to you about protection and commercialisation of ideas, and so an introduction to intellectual property for pharmaceuticals. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, I'm Katie. I'm a patent attorney with Barker Brattle. Will is a trainee patent attorney. We're going to give you an overview of all kinds of IP today, but patents are very much our favourite, and so the main focus will be on that. So the main aims, takeaways for this session is to have a bit of an idea for yourselves of what intellectual property is and what you actually need to do to protect it. I imagine all of you have come across intellectual property in some form before, but I don't know how much any of you know. So if I'm going too fast at any point you've got a question, just feel free to stick up your hands. Similarly, if you've heard it all before, let me know. Secondly, I want you to know where in the product development process you should be thinking about intellectual property. There are certain well, it should be an ongoing process, but there are certain stages where it's particularly important, and I hope this talk will give you an idea about that. Thirdly, once you've found it, you've spotted the IP, what should you do to protect it? And finally, how it can actually be used commercially. So we'll talk about what intellectual property is, the different types of IP, so patents, trademarks, copyright, trade secrets and designs, and how you protect all of those. And we'll finish with a little section on how you commercialise your IP. So the legal definition of intellectual property is a right that can be enforced through the court to protect your ideas. So it gives you the right to stop someone from doing something. If you've got a patent for your invention and someone else copies it, there's nothing automatic that stops them copying you, but you have the right to take them to court and say, you've got to stop that and pay me damages or whatever. It can also be valued as property. So you often hear of small companies who've got great ideas then selling for millions. The group who did the innocent smoothies are a great example of that. So they didn't do anything particularly new. They took fruit, they blended it, they made smoothies. But they had such a good brand with it, and they built the reputation for that brand, that their trademarks were worth millions, literally. And they sold their trademarks, their intellectual property, for a large amount of money. Nowadays, intellectual property can actually represent a very large proportion of what a company is worth. So years ago, their factories, their machines would have been the main assets, but nowadays the intellectual property is often the most valuable thing on their balance sheets. So intellectual property lets you protect different kinds of ideas in different ways, but the different kinds of intellectual property aren't completely separate. There are definite overlaps, more so between some and others, and we'll discuss that a bit as we go through. So in particular, on the side with trademarks and copyrights and design rights, that's the look and feel, it's the branding. On the side of trade secrets and patents, that's actually how things work, so the principles behind how you're making things or how they're used. And why does IP matter? So it gives you a competitive advantage. This can be in terms of stopping other people using your brand. So if you spent ages building up consumer loyalty in your brand, you don't want someone else to come along and use the same name. It can be, we've spent 15 years developing this medicine. It has cost us millions. A generic company could start making it tomorrow as soon as what it is published. We need some way of getting back that investment. So your patent stops them coming into the market. It keeps your competitors off your patch. It's a tradable asset. So you can sell it to other people, you can buy IP rights from other people, you can license them, i.e. giving someone the right to use it in return for money while still keeping ownership. And it adds value to your company. So a lot of the assets on a company's sheet are now likely to be intangible assets, intellectual property. I will now hand over to my colleague Will to take you through types of IP. And due to the lecture recording, this will require a slight amount of faff in readjusting microphones. But if you bear with us for a minute. Will will talk about trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets and designs, and then I'll take over again for patents. If at any point you've got questions as we go along, do just feel free to stick your hand up and ask.
So can everyone at the back hear me to start off with? Yeah? Thumbs up, that's good. Perfect. So types of IP, as Katie said, there are a number of different ways that you can protect your IP, and it's worth spending a bit of time thinking about how you're going to protect your intellectual property before you do it, because it can, take a lot of money and things like that. So there are 5 key types of intellectual property, as Katie said. I'll just take us through the first 4, and then I'll hand back to Katie for the last one of patents. First one, trademarks. So trademarks are quite nice. They're very approachable. You see them every day. And they can be all sorts of things as well. It's what a lot of people don't know. So it can be a word, Coca-Cola and Yakult, 2 examples that I've put up there. It can be an abbreviation, IBM, HSBC, things like that. Numbers, personal names, logos. You can see some there. You might recognise the logos that are put up. Other kinds of things that can be protected include slogans. So should have gone to Specsavers, something like that. You can protect shapes. So here we've got a pot which has been protected, and this is actually, well, you might recognise it, it's Yakult's pot, but they've got the shape protected because that's particularly distinctive of their brand. This patch here is actually brown, doesn't look it very much on the projector screen there, but that is a famous parcel delivery company has got that protected. Anyone know it? UPS? Yeah, the big brown vans that go around. You see them a lot in films, but they're coming over here as well. Other things that can be protected, sounds and also smells, but smells are really difficult to do, but you can get them in places like the UK and the US. Other interesting shapes include ones that have been in the news particularly recently. People are trying to protect the shape of cars. So London Taxi Company that makes all of the London cabs have been trying to protect the shape of their cabs, and Jaguar Land Rover have been thinking about protecting the shape of their F-Type. So very interesting. So trademarks are a badge of origin, and it's really useful for people to protect them because then your competitors can't use your brand. People will come to you because they know that your product is good, or your service is good, or your company provides good products overall. And if your competitor was to start using that badge of origin, then your clients, your customers might go to them by mistake. So it's kind of a guarantee that the quality and consistency are coming from the same place every time. And so using your trademark, you can build up a really strong brand loyalty and reputation, your company values, and your identity. Another really good thing about trademarks, unlike some forms of IP, is that they can last forever. So you've got to pay a fee to keep them valid, but if you do that, then there's no reason why you can't keep your company trading under the same name and protect that brand indefinitely. And so there's just some pharmaceutical companies up here to give examples of popular brands out there. So when selecting a trademark, it's important to think of things that might be valid as a trademark before you develop your product, before you put a name to it, before you think of your company name. And so to be registerable as a trademark, it must be distinctive. It can be something like an invented word like Nestle, a word with no direct reference to the goods or services, or some sort of elusive word such as Iceland. Iceland's actually an interesting one because the Icelandic government has been taking action against the supermarket chain in the UK for their trademark, as they've been trying to enforce their trademark against Icelandic companies. So that's kind of an interesting one that's going through the court system at the moment. What's not allowable as a trademark, so descriptive words such as free from or cold pressed, something that describes the product or service that you're providing, or laudatory terms such as gold, the best, or super tasty. And when you're selecting a trademark as well, it's good to have in your mind an idea of what the words might mean in other languages. So we've got a few interesting examples here. Nova, which is obviously a type of car made by Vauxhall, means not going in Spanish, so not great for a car brand. Bimbo is a Mexican baking conglomerate. Gerber is a US baby food, and Gerber means to vomit in French, so it might be quite descriptive, but not a good trademark if you're going to sell your product in France. And these might all be all right. Maybe these companies don't sell in those countries, but have a think about where you're going to be providing your goods and services if you're going to pursue trademark protection.
Windows uses the different trademark in Iceland, I think it is, or it might be Sweden, because the direct translation of Windows is seal bladder.
Really? I didn't know that. That's the useful one. So other examples, finger licking good, which is KFC, I think. Eat your fingers off in China, so not ideal. And come alive with the Pepsi generation means Pepsi will bring your ancestors back from the dead in China. So, yeah, I don't think that those were wise choices, but maybe they use different phrases in different countries, as Katie was saying. Have you got a question?
Yeah, so would that whole phrase be trademarked then?
Yeah, so all of the words would be classed as a trademark. Just as, Coca-Cola could be a trademark or IBM could be a trademark, you can get a whole phrase. There's a whole load of different things that you can get trademarks from. The examples that I gave, such as shape and words and colours, are just a few of the examples, really. Yeah?
Saying things like colours, trademarking it, would that be certain colour combinations and things like that? And would you only enforce it against people in the same industry, or would you be enforcing it against everyone around it? Because say someone doing like orange and black combination or something like that, or are you just literally doing an IP of a single colour? Is it actually specific combinations, or is it just...
That's a really good question.
You can get trademark protection for a single colour. The thing that Will hasn't touched on yet, I'm not sure if that's in the next slides or not, is that when you file a trademark, you have to select a list of classes that trademark is for. So like Cadbury's might protect their colour purple for chocolate, but they wouldn't be able to stop someone who worked in software using that colour purple. So it's just in the area, you have to choose which areas. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also very specific. You couldn't just say purple, you'd have to give a specific shade of purple.
Yeah, that's it. And if you wanted a colour combination, I imagine that if a trademark attorney was looking at it, they would try and get the individual colours as well as the combination as separate trademarks, because then that gives you a stronger IP portfolio. But certainly you could get combinations just as well as you could get single colours on their own. It's an interesting question, actually. So with trademarks, there's a few different types of IP, as we've said, and some of them you have to register and some of them you don't. With trademarks, you can do either, but there are some benefits from registering. So registering your trademark prevents someone from using or registering the same or similar mark on same or similar goods or services.
It goes back to the classes that we were mentioning, so like same or similar goods or services.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you register your trademark, you'd say, for Vauxhall Nova, that would be registered in cars, for example, and someone could use that if they were going to be selling baby food. It's just a simple example I've thought of at the top of my head. So authorised use can tarnish or dilute, unauthorised use can tarnish or dilute reputation. It's all about trying to keep your brand strong and letting people know that the goods or services that they're buying are really good quality, or at least the quality that they normally expect. It prevents others from registering first, and it serves as a deterrent to others when they're thinking about what brands that they should use. As Katie alluded to earlier as well, it adds value to your company, so it gives you something that you can sell off to an investor or someone that wants to buy your company, more than just saying, here you go, here's what I do, and it says, our customers will all come to you now because you own the brand. So, how to get started with thinking about a trademark? So you identify the markers that you used to protect. So you could go through the previous process and have a think about other countries and other languages that your brand might be used in. Identify where you wish to use your mark and protect it. And this is important for all different types of IP. Based on the country that you're in or you're using the product in, the laws will be slightly different. Of course, you need to register your trademark in every individual country. So it's going to cost a lot more if you want to register it all around the world. If you've got a set of sort of 3 or 4 countries, then it's not going to cost too much. So you've got to decide what's right for you. Trademark is registered in relation to specific goods or services, again, as we've just been mentioning. But you might want to think about what you want to use it for at the moment, and also what you might want to use it for in the future. Have you got any other product ideas or services ideas that you might go into in the future? It's worth doing a search for similar trademarks before you apply for your trademark, so that you don't run into issues later on. So people can oppose other trademarks, or if you spent a lot of money branding your product and advertising that brand, and then you register your trademark and you find out that actually someone else was using it and you can't get a trademark on it, then you're going to run into issues later on. So it's worth having a look out there to see whether anyone's using the same brand to start off with. And then once you've done all of that, you can apply to the UK Intellectual Property Office and go through the process to get your trademark registered. So that's trademarks, a quick whistle-stop tour. Now go on to copyright. Yeah? Sorry.
You said that when you register your brand in a country, in a particular country, it's not guaranteed that someone else in another country can use it. So how, for example, if I register a brand here in the UK, does it mean someone else in another country can sue you and it's legal?
Yeah, so if you've only got it registered in the UK, there might be some sort of unregistered right also in a different country if you're still using the brand or the product there. But yeah, it would vary a lot, and you'd have to seek advice on the individual country's situation, I think.
The flip side of that is if someone else is using the mark you want to use but just using it in China, you could use it in the UK without any problem in all likelihood. But as soon as there's a big multinational company that might operate in lots of different countries, you're going to have to be a bit more careful about looking at where they have that right.
And then for startups, if someone is maybe like designing a product or something, at what stage is it good for someone to register the brand before it's launched or something like that?
We generally recommend just before launch, although you can file trademark registrations after you've launched. They don't have to be secret beforehand, unlike patents, which we'll come on to later. But we generally recommend trying to do a good search, whether that's just on Google and Companies House yourself, because you don't want to put lots of work into building a brand with one name and then have to change it because you find someone else is using it. And then make registration before you launch is generally what we recommend.
How come you see lots of pubs with the same names? Are they like trademark?
We've got a lot of traditional pub names in the UK which are trademarked, with things like Wetherspoons. Obviously it's the same franchise, so that's the same name, it's the same group of companies. But yeah, things like the Queen's Head, the King's Head, everything, they're very traditional names. You wouldn't be able to get a trademark for those from out.
That's all right. Very good answers. Are there any other questions on trademarks before we move on to copyright? You can always ask later if you want as well. So moving on then, copyright. So copyright's all about protecting artistic and literary works. So we've got some examples up here, some sheet music, some film, there's a sculpture, there's a picture of Peter Rabbit, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, and a book as well. So these are all examples of copyright, or copyrightable material. So, as I said, as I kind of alluded to, it's protection for how ideas are expressed. It's not the ideas themselves, and the basic forms of literary works, sounds or images. But copyright doesn't have any way that you can register it. It's a right that arises automatically, and you can't go to the UK IPO and say, I've got some copyright, can you give me a certificate or anything like that. Generally speaking, if you have written a piece of work or if you've taken a picture, then you own the copyright to that. There are some kind of complications to that, such as if you're employed, but you generally have the right of copyright automatically once you've made a piece of work, as long as you haven't copied it from anyone else. So copyright generally expires 70 years after an author's death, so this is unlike trademarks, which can be indefinite. It's still quite a long time, though, and there is actually an interesting example in Peter Pan. So I don't know whether anyone's heard of this, but a few years ago, the copyright on Peter Pan was about to expire, and there's a campaign to stop this because all of the rights to the Peter Pan's copyright had been donated to Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, so the Children's Hospital, and obviously this was a great thing, and the campaign was trying to keep that money coming in for Great Ormond Street Hospital. So it's actually written into the UK copyright law now that this applies for absolutely everything apart from Peter Pan's works, the original Peter Pan works, which are going to last forever and sort of live in the never land of Peter Pan. So that's quite sweet, really. An expert tip for copyright works is to keep records of your work. So there's a number of different ways that you can do this. One of the most popular is to send it to yourself, recorded mail. So if you've written a piece of music on a sheet or you've taken a photograph, then you could send it to yourself, recorded mail, but then don't open the envelope. And that keeps a really nice record of that you had that, you created that on a certain date. So here's a few other examples of copyright, just quickly. Some code, and that's a similar kind of thing. It's all completely copyright. It's very difficult to get other protection for it. There's a packet of medication there, and all of the artwork on that would be copyrightable. Some instructions for treating burns, and all of that text would be copyrightable. And the images here of some complex device. I'm not exactly sure what it is, Katie, do you know?
A light, LED light.
LED light, there you go. That's all. That picture would be subject to copyright as well.
This shows why artistic works, it's quite a broad term, it's relevant to every company. Every company has advertising materials, product drawings, so even if you don't see yourselves as an artistic company, you'll still have things in which you have copyright.
Oh, and I said that I'd come back to Beatrix Potter as well. Beatrix Potter's kind of interesting, also on a similar theme to how Peter Pan was interesting, in that the copyright has now expired on Beatrix Potter because she died in 1943. So 70 years after that has now expired. And so the original Beatrix Potter works can be copied by anyone.
But there might well be some trademark rights.
But there might well be trademark rights. I don't know about that. So moving on then, onto designs. And designs protect the appearance of products, how things look. And so we've got some pill containers. We've got some interesting looking metal things here. I'm not exactly sure. Do you have an idea?
Pill presses.
Sorry?
The pill presses.
Oh, pill presses. There you go. Oh, so very relevant to the pharmaceutical industry. There's some very nice looking pills up here. I'm not sure whether I should advise taking them though. And some other pills down here. So all of these look kind of different and distinctive, and that's what designs would be out there to protect. In a similar way to trademarks, again, there's lots of similar themes running through this. You don't have to register registered designs though. So you can get an unregistered design right, which protects against copying. So if someone's taken your design and has directly copied it, but it's free and automatic, just like copyright. But generally, they don't last as long as registered designs. So registered designs just protect more generally against a design giving the same overall impression. There doesn't have to be copying there. And it's a strong protection and generally lasts up to 25 years. So just as I was saying as we were talking about for trademarks, designs would be a similar situation in that it's very country specific. The law changes depending on where you're interested in. And in the UK, unregistered designs expire after the shorter of 15 years from creation and 10 years from first marketing. So it depends on when you created it and when you marketed it as to when it will expire. And it only protects the shape of the product. But in the EU, unregistered designs only last 3 years, so really short protection, but it protects the surface decoration and the colour as well as the shape. So yeah, it's all a case of knowing where your unregistered design right infringement might have happened. With registered designs, so this is where you've gone to the patent office or the intellectual property office and said, can I have a certificate for this? In the UK and the EU, they're much more along the same vein. They both protect surface decoration and colour as well as shape. They last up to 25 years, so much longer than unregistered design rights, providing, again, that renewal fees are paid. And they need to be new and given a different overall impression from any previous design to be valid. But that said, there isn't any kind of examination process, so if you file a design, then you will get a certificate back, and it's only when it gets to court that would really be looked into any further. So, when do you register a design? Ideally before launch, but you can do it up to a year after you've launched your product. There's something called a grace period that can be employed. And something that people fall foul of a little bit through designs is to get good design drawings, which are in black and white line drawings. And I've got an example up here. Has anyone seen these suitcases around airports? Yeah, the trunky ones. There's some similar ones around on the market at the moment, as I'll go into. And basically what happened here was the owners of Trunky filed. They thought about IP pretty late. They probably could have got a patent for it, I think the judge said, but because they'd disclosed the invention, they couldn't get a patent. They'd already disclosed some of their other designs, which were similar as well, and so they ended up just in a last-minute kind of thing filing this picture here. And when it got to court, the judge found that because they hadn't filed line drawings for their design, they'd shown that there should be a really good contrast between these wheels and the case itself. So the wheels are very dark and the case is very light, and this was found to be very important. And a competitor had released a product which they were fighting over in court, and they found that the contrast was particularly relevant, and because there wasn't the contrast in the competitor's product, they didn't win their lawsuit. And so it just kind of goes to show that you've got to think about a lot of things when it comes to IP protection, not only just getting it filed, but also how exactly you do that process as well. So making sure that, in this case, that the drawings are right was a big thing for that case. So in a similar way to the trademarks applications, you've got to then prepare and file your application once you're ready, once you know what your product looks like. And then you send your application off to the Intellectual Property Office, but they, as I said earlier, only check formalities. They don't do any examination of whether it is actually new or distinctive over what was known before. And a design is quite good, really, because a design's granted within a few weeks of filing. So then you've got something that you can go out to competitors and say, I've got this piece of intellectual property to my name, and you don't know whether it's valid or not, but it's something to scare other people off. So there's quite a big interplay of trademarks and designs, and I'll just hurry up a little bit because I know we're running out of time. So if you're protecting, especially for things like shapes, you could get a design on it to start off with, but then you build up a brand reputation based on that shape, and then you could look at protecting that through a trademark later on to extend your protection potentially forever. So it can be really powerfully used in certain circumstances. Moving on to the fourth type of IP then, trade secrets. And this is all about confidential information. So the kind of know-how about how you've done something, things that you can keep secret but still sell your product. And because you've kept it secret, because you've got that trick, you can stop your competitors from getting your market position. So it could be a recipe, it could be a method of making something, it could be a list of client pricing information, new research that you might not have patented yet. But it can be often overlooked and easily lost. So, just someone telling a competitor that your secrets, it's all gone. You've got to be very careful about who you tell your secret to, even if you have a non-disclosure agreement, because once they've done it, once a disgruntled employee has left your company and told the competitor what your secret is, there's no way of getting it back. You might be able to go to court or something like that, but it's going to be messy. So trade secrets, just like copyright, can't be registered. It's really important, therefore, that you do tell your employees and other people you're working with that something is a secret if it is. And, it lasts for as long as you can keep it secret. It's as simple as that. If someone goes out and tells the world, then that's it, your trade secret's lost. And you need some sort of contractual obligation for people to stay quiet. So particularly something that's interesting for pharmaceuticals, if your product can be reverse engineered and you could find out your trade secret, then it's not going to be a great trade secret. If you market or you start to sell your new blockbuster drug, but you don't have a patent on it and you're just relying on trade secrets, then people can take, mass spec, NMR of the product and work out what it is, and then a few weeks later they'll work out a way to make it. So it's worth getting proper protection through other types of IP if you can as well on trade secrets. But obviously then you lose your secret because, as Katie will come on to later, your patent will be published. So expert tip here, make sure in your employment contracts that they contain a secrecy clause and make it clear to everyone around what exactly is the secret bit. And so now I'll pass over to Katie.
Yeah. Has anyone got any more questions on the non-patent kinds of IP?
Yeah, go ahead.
About the secret part, I've seen businesses having employees break off and then start their own businesses and then they have the secrets and all that. So how does this protect the original owner if someone leaves your business or company and then lost all the secrets and then starts?
Yeah, it's not the easiest, which is why we always recommend getting patent protection as well if you can.
Not quite sure that microphone's doing what you should, but never mind. But what you should have is something in your contract with that employee about confidentiality. So if they went to another company and blabbed about your secret, you could then sue them for breach of contract. There's also some confidentiality legislation separately, but it's much easier if you can go for them after breach of contract. So you can't, once the genie's escaped from the bottle, you can't get it back in. But you discourage your employee from letting it out because they know they could personally be sued if they disclosed it. So that's the only protection you have for trade secrets. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because obviously there's that legal part of people signing things, and but it's quite common that people work for others and then they go out and then do the same thing. They just change a few things and then so it's kind of like they use ideas from the business they work for and then just alter it and then do the same thing.
It entirely depends what is seen as confidential and what isn't, and what contracts you've got in place. So the level to which you can or can't reuse things you've done for one company should be laid out in your agreement with that company. In some cases, that's not laid out very well in advance, and that can cause problems, but a company that knows what it's doing will make sure it has an assignment of the rights and the person knows that this is going to be owned by them, or that they only got a license for it and the person who came up with the ideas might also license it to someone else. So that's the kind, if you ever getting a consultant to come in and do something or working with a designer, that's something you should always get in writing at the beginning because it can save a lot of problems further down the line. Feel free to come and discuss at the end if you want to go into that a bit further. Anyway, we're coming on to my favourite kind of IP now, patents, how things work. So patents protect inventions. In so many ways, it's a bargain. You disclose your idea to the rest of the world because it has to be published, and in return for that, you get a monopoly on that idea for up to 20 years. So you can stop other people using that idea for as long as your patent is in force. Like the other kinds of registered rights, and indeed unregistered rights, what you can and can't get varies from country to country. So if you're wanting to exploit it worldwide, you might want patents in lots of different countries around the world. You might well just target the countries that have got your major markets or major manufacturers in rather than going absolutely everywhere. But you do need to think about which countries you want. And the big thing, if your idea has already been disclosed to the public in any way, even if it was just chatting to your friends down the pub, it can no longer be patented because you've disclosed it. So if someone comes on Dragon's Den talking about how they've got their wonderful idea and they're going to get a patent, it's already too late because they've disclosed it to the public, everyone's seen it on TV, or the cameraman has seen it in the studio if it's not yet been aired. So I wanted to make a big point of this because it is so depressing when I get people coming to me with this brilliant idea and then they show me the video of their product on YouTube. I was like, I can't do anything for you. So the one thing I'd like you to take away from this presentation, if nothing else, if you get a brilliant idea and want to commercialise it in future, make sure you get the protection you want patent-wise in place before you publish anything. And patent attorneys are always happy to talk with you. If it's too early to patent, we'll tell you. Yeah?
If you're sharing an idea with someone, does that not count then if they're like going through a patent with you?
There are things called non-disclosure agreements, and you can formally print one off and get people to sign it, and that's great, and then what you talk about with them is secret. But if you're working with someone and both of you know that you have to keep it secret before you file a patent, there's an implicit non-disclosure agreement there. It's always safest to have it in writing, but verbal contracts are still contracts, even though they're a bit harder to enforce. So long as both of you understand that it's secret, then it's okay. So, patents, they protect inventions. They're inventions on new products or processes that solve a technical problem. So they're not just the way things look or feel, they're actually how it works. And discoveries aren't inventions as well. You're just finding something that's already existed. You've not made something new. So if you go back far enough, the wheel was an invention. It took a surprising amount of time of rolling logs before people realised that axles might be useful. Telescopes and, of course, light bulbs, which you always see in any IP talk above someone's head. So when it comes to invention spotting, which is a very important part of any product design process, you need to think that patents can be granted for anything that's new, so it has to be novel over anything that's gone before. And when that's assessed from is the filing date of your patent application. So anything that existed before your patent was filed is prior art. Anything after that, you don't need to worry about. And it's, as well as being new, it's also got to be inventive, i.e. not obvious. And you have to think about, would this have just been the logical next step for someone working in the field? If so, it might well not be patentable. And thirdly, it's got to be industrially applicable. This covers pretty much everything, really. It's fairly broad, it's not very limiting. The one time I've seen this cited to stop a patent getting granted is when someone has filed a patent application for a perpetual motion machine, and the examiner has just said, this will not work. It is therefore not industrially applicable because you cannot do anything with it. So you can't get the patent with it. So as you're going through a product development process or research and development, you should always make sure that all of your researchers have in the back of their mind that they should be looking out for things that fill these criteria, because they can then come to ideally one central person and say, I've had this idea, what do you think? And that lets you capture the ideas and work out how to handle them. Yeah?
Can you not take something that's been used for something else and use it for something new?
Potentially, yeah.
So you could, but you couldn't.
You can get protection for new use of things in some...
Using something that's already out there.
But you wouldn't... So
Using it for something that's
the claims of the patent are what define the scope of protection you're after. So if you wanted to use a chair to fix an aeroplane, you couldn't get a patent claim for a chair because chairs already exist. But you could get a patent claim for use of a chair to fix this, because that's quite specific and that's the new bit. So yeah, it just depends how you angle the kind of protection.
Also, if someone had claimed like this massive area, for example, loads and loads of different compounds in the pharmaceutical field, for example, and then you come up with an idea that actually these compounds in this particular range here, this much smaller range, are particularly good, then that's worth holding a patent on its own. So it's all about contribution to society. Have you told society something new that's useful? someone's patent for this big scope, all these big massive range of compounds was still in force, then you wouldn't be able to use your invention in this small range inside it if you don't have permission from the other guys.
So they wouldn't be able to use your specific selection necessarily, but you wouldn't be able to use your selection either without a license of their patent. So, yeah, but you'd still be able to get protection for it. So, talked a bit about inventive step and for something to be patentable, it needing to offer a kind of technical solution to a technical problem. So in this example, we've got, this is a buoy, it floats, it's got a light on it, it's used to warn ships when they're getting close to shipping lanes or rocky areas or the likes. This is a bell, it makes a noise when it moves. If my invention was attaching a bell to a buoy, so that when it moved in the waves, the bell sounded and gave an audible alert to the buoy being there. So just pretend that's new. I imagine it exists, but pretend it's new. Do you think that would be inventive? Show of hands for yes? Yeah, you've solved a technical problem. It's providing an audible alert as well as a visual alert. It's doing something new. So although both of the bits were already known, you've put them together in a way that's technically useful, and therefore you would be able to get patent protection for it. Coming on now to a nasal hair trimmer and a torch. I keep both of them on my bedside table, and sometimes they get lost. I think it'd be easier to find them both if they were larger, so I'm going to attach them together and make a single product that's a combination torch and nasal hair remover. Do you think that's going to be patentable? Show of hands for yes? No. So unless you somehow got the torch specifically angled to help you trim your nasal hair, no, you're not going to be able to get a patent for that because you're just sticking two things together. There's no particular advantage. You're not providing anything new that people wouldn't have known before. So lots of different things can be claimed in a patent. Is any new composition of matter or apparatus, so if you've developed a new drug, you can get protection for that. New uses, including medical uses. So if you've been using ibuprofen to treat headaches for years, but you suddenly realise that ibuprofen could also be used to treat gout or cancer or something, and that wasn't known before, you'd be able to get protection for that particular use of the drug. That comes back to, as I was mentioning, the new use of a chair, for example. New methods and processes, so if you've developed a more efficient way of making a drug, you can also get protection for that. And various gene sequences of uses and all sorts. Coming to what is not patentable, I mentioned discoveries aren't patentable, but there are also some... Sorry, question before.
So you can patent specific parts of DNA?
Do you want to take up that?
Yeah, stuff like that, it's got to be linked with some sort of use, specific industrial use, I think. And yeah, it's a very murky area, yeah. But you couldn't patent, say, something that was completely known before in the human body. It would have to be, you'd have to have done something special to get that product.
So you can't just have discovered it. If you've managed to extract it and then found you could use it in some way, you can get protection for that, but not just for the discovery. There are some exclusions which, for different reasons, but there's various things that just cannot be protected by patents. So theories, mathematical concepts, methods of treatment or diagnosis. I mean, the logic behind the methods of treatment or diagnosis is that you always want a doctor to be able to treat you in the best way possible. You don't want them to know there's a better way of treating you and not be able to do it because of a patent, so that's excluded from patentability. Business methods and ways of thinking are also excluded. Something that involves destruction of a human embryo is also excluded on moral grounds. There's lots of arguments at the moment about whether or not stem cell research should be excluded, but that's just to be aware of. Artistic literary creations, they're excluded from patent protection because they've got all the kinds of protection that Will talked about, so you can still get protection for them, but in different ways. So, people, oranges, who thinks oranges are patentable? TARDIS? How about the TARDIS? That's a time machine. That does something useful technically. What do you reckon? You could get absolutely copyright in the name and possibly in the stories as well, but you can't get a patent. And the reason you can't get a patent is one I haven't really touched on yet. I mentioned that the idea of patents is that you disclose your idea in return for a monopoly. You have not disclosed the idea of a time machine in enough detail for someone to actually be able to make one, so you have not really disclosed the idea of a time machine, so you can't get patent protection for it. Patent applications have to be sufficient, i.e. they have to have enough information in them that you could actually make them work. And as far as I know, no one's managed that for a time machine just yet. E = mc²? very useful, but it's just a formula, so no, you can't get patent protection for that. You might be able to get patent protection for uses of it, but not the equation itself. Chocolate? Is that an invention, do you reckon? Yeah. The actual cocoa beans, no, they're just a discovery, but back in the day when chocolate was first invented, he'd invented a new process to make it. That chocolate itself was a new composition. I mean, now it's been known for far too long, but at the time when it was first developed, yes, you could have got patent protection for chocolate. Light bulbs, of course. Harry Potter, that's going to be copyright. Mug with a picture on it, that's going to be design right or copyright. Surface of the moon, that's a discovery. So you're only really left with the machine for slicing bread, chocolate, and the light bulb out of those options.
Someone had got a patent for chocolate. For the first 20 years, all the other companies would kind of pay that person money to manufacture a different type.
If the company had been happy to sell licenses, yes. If they hadn't, your competitors wouldn't have been able to make chocolate without being sued.
Okay, so if you get into something early,
It could be very useful. Because technology moves on so much faster now, particularly on the software side, there's a lot of discussions about whether a 20-year monopoly is really still fair and should patent terms be shortened. But at the moment, yes, you'd be able to keep other people out of that idea for quite a while.
Even on chocolate nowadays, one of my colleagues used to work for Cadbury's, and she was saying that they protect their inventions a lot. It might be machines that they use to make the chocolate or methods of making the chocolate, but different ways of achieving that soft, silky, and crisp texture that you get.
Can you tell he's getting commission from Cadbury?
I'm not going to go by Cadbury's. There's still developments in that field, even though it was known, chocolate overall, the small subset of a way of making chocolate with a really good characteristic using a certain process might not be known.
Yeah. So, patents are much harder and more expensive to get than registered designs or trademarks. But in some ways, the protection they can give is much, much stronger. As we were just saying, you can stop anyone making chocolate. You're not just stopping them calling it Cadbury's, you could be stopping anyone making chocolate. So the patent protects the invention itself, not the brand, not how it looks. You could change the appearance completely, but if it works in the same way, your patent will still give you protection. But patents are examined as a result of this. So once you've filed your application, you can say patent pending. You've probably seen that on lots of products with the application number. But you can't actually enforce your patent. You can't go and sue people until it's granted. But once it is granted, you can then sue people for damages for what they've been doing whilst it was pending. So it's a good deterrent to discourage people from starting if something says patent pending, because they know they could be sued in future. So you can get patent protection for methods, processes, and uses, as well as just objects. The same rules apply in terms of being new and obvious and all the rest of it, but that could be, for example, how you make your pharmaceuticals, as well as actually what they contain. So as you're going through the product development process, if you have a new product or a new way of making it, or indeed a method for making a product that has been made previously but in a better way, you should think about whether or not to file a patent application. Trade secrets might be better in some ways, particularly for medicines. It can take a long time to come to market sometimes, so the 20 years might not really be enough. So you might want to keep it secret as a trade secret and then file a patent application just before you launch the product, and we'll come on to that a bit more later. But it's things to be thinking about early on. The patent document has three main sections. It's got the background, which sets out what the invention is and describes some specific examples. This is quite important from the point of view of sufficiency that I mentioned earlier. So you've got to disclose the invention well enough that anyone can do it, and you're not allowed to add anything to your patent application once it's been filed. So if the examiner might raise questions or problems during examination, you want to make sure you've got everything you possibly can have in that background from the very beginning. With background and detailed description together there. I was kind of lumping them together, I'm afraid. The claims I mentioned earlier, they're actually what define the scope of the protection you're after. So if you might have written a description that covers every single drug that you'd use in the treatment of cancer, but actually your claim is only to one specific drug, and other people could use things that were mentioned in the description but not claimed, and you wouldn't be able to sue them. So if you're looking at a patent application and thinking, oh, this looks ridiculously broad, I can't do anything, look at the claims, because you might find the claims are actually very narrow. So as I mentioned, you cannot add anything after filing, so getting it right at filing is the big thing. We quite often have people coming to us who filed their own patent application and are running into trouble and wanting help, but after filing, there's very little we can do. In many ways, I think the most important time to have professional assistance with patents is when you're filing them, even if you then wanted to do the examination yourself, because that is where things can go very badly wrong in ways that you can't fix. So, in general, how to get a patent? We'd file in the UK first, it would be examined, eventually you get a patent. The quickest I've ever seen a patent get granted in the UK was 9 months. It can take several years, often a bit more than 3 years at the moment, 4 or 5 years perhaps, if not a bit more. 1 year from your first filing, you can file applications abroad, claiming priority from your first filing, i.e. they take the filing date of the first filing as their effective filing date. And that's important because, as I mentioned, patent applications have to be new and inventive over everything before their filing date. So the earlier filing date you can claim, the better. And that 12 months is a hard deadline. You can't extend it. So that is often the big crunch point for deciding, in this first year, have I decided which countries I'm going into? Is this being successful? How much money do I want to spend on this? How widely do I want to protect it? And then you can end up with a whole bundle of patents granted in different countries to give you protection in different countries. So patents and trade secrets do go together a fair bit. So when you've got drug development, it can take a very long time. And before you get to the clinical phase, you might be happy keeping everything as trade secrets. When you get to the clinical phase, you're actually going to have to be talking to patients, so you probably can't keep it secret anymore because you have to tell people what you're giving them. So that would be the time to file your first patent. You might continue the development during the clinical phase before launch, and you might then file subsequent patent applications to refinements you've made, better ways of doing things you've come up with. But you want to have some protection in place before you start telling anyone about your idea, even if it's still in trial phase. Right, so has anyone got any questions on that?
So say you've got like a rough formulation of drug that you're using for clinical and you patent that. Can you still, how does the patent work then? Because it won't, like, you've refined it, it's not a new thing.
Yeah. I think we touched on this very briefly earlier. You can have what you call selection invention. So if you've said one compound from this big group, and then in the clinical trials you find that this compound right here is actually the best, if your patent, the original patent, mentioned that compound by name, you wouldn't necessarily need to file a new one. You could just, that is already in there. If your original patent was still pending, you'd be able to add a claim saying this one in particular. But if that one wasn't mentioned by name in your original patent, then it's, so long as it's a big area and you're selecting a small bit, you can still argue that that's inventive because it's a narrow selection out of a big range that gives a marked benefit. Or your refinements might be in how you make it or other things, which are separate.
Quite commonly in the pharmaceutical industry, you'll find that even after their first product is launched, they'll then develop the formulation and get an extended release version of the same active ingredient. And so then they'll go after a patent for that if it wasn't new, wasn't obvious. It is new, wasn't obvious. So yeah, it's a big game because pharmaceuticals are worth so much money to the pharmaceutical industry. They spend a lot of money on their IP strategies.
Yeah. So, a bit of a discussion. This is a packet of tablets. So, in this, there's all kinds of different IP: trademarks, copyright, designs, trade secrets, patents. So, I'd like you to shout out some examples. If you want a couple of minutes discussing with whoever you're next to start with, otherwise I'll just go round and ask for a few suggestions here and there. So do you want a couple of minutes to discuss, or are you happy to shout things out?
Shape of the tablet.
Absolutely, yeah. So you could get design right in that.
There's a logo on the box.
A trademark. Coming back to the shape of the tablet, if you'd actually designed a shape of tablet that made it easier to swallow, that would actually have a technical effect. So you might be able to get patent protection as well, depending. Come on, there's more than that. So you automatically have copyright in the text on the packaging, yes, assuming you haven't copied it off someone else.
If the list, like doing the list of that, if that really say shit like obvious.
But yeah, absolutely, you can get patent protection for the blister pack. So here's just a few examples, including the ones you've already said. In terms of copyright, although it's not shown in here, you'd got all the advertising information and the instructions on how to take it. You'd have copyright protection in that. The composition, we've discussed earlier, of the drug in the tablet, you might well have patent protection for that. You might have patent protection for how it's made as well, for the apparatus you use to make it. There might be some know-how that you've not published that isn't in your patent application that you're keeping as a trade secret. So even in something as everyday as a box of tablets, there's likely to be a lot of intellectual property. You can imagine in things like smartphones and the likes, the number of patents relevant to one phone can be just enormous. So a few things to think about, whatever kind of company you're in. I'll hand back over to Will to talk about commercialisation, unless anyone's got any more questions on patents.
Are you actually better holding